Everything we do influences other people around us. So each and every one of us is probably bigger than Instagram. Now, I want to take you on a journey of the surprising choices that people make. And we'll use behavioral insights to understand those choices and understand how we can turn some of those choices around. Now, my journey on behavioral insights started when a surprise literally ran into me. I was dressed from head to toe in a canary suit. That's not the surprising choice. I was riding my bike, and a van ran into me at about 80 kilometers an hour, the driver of which had his dog on his lap between him and the steering wheel. That's the surprising choice. Now, I was studying economics, and I decided that I could use my time more productively looking at the things that perhaps drove risk for cyclists and pedestrians. So I started to plot everything and work out what the associations were. And what I found was that as seatbelt wearing went up, from them being fitted in cars and people gradually getting the idea and then being encouraged through advertising and then made compulsory when almost everybody started to wear them, that the rate of deaths and serious injuries for cyclists on those same roads followed that trend. So the surprising choice there is that people consume risk. As we make things safer, people do more risky things. It's okay if you're the person with the seatbelt and the dog in the car, but it's not okay if you're on the other side. The idea I'd like to share is that the hands lead the heart, leads the head. So that's back to what we do is important for us and for others and for systems. There's a lot of social research that tracks trends through our community. And what we find is that people do what other people do. Businesses follow behind in terms of time, and government follow way behind because they're really conservative and they don't want to lose the votes. So back to what we do is the start, is the tap on this system. Now, my contention is that we've been slow in making progress on climate change because we've started from the head. We're dealing with the facts, and people find that overwhelming. So you shut down, and you sort of work out, well, if it's too overwhelming, there's nothing I can do. And you start to perhaps argue the opposite, or just avoid, and perhaps shut down the things that you do. So if we're going to start from the hands instead of starting from the head, we're going to need some tools to help people change. And the three tools in three stories that I'd like to offer you are, firstly, framing. If we can get people to bring their best selves into a situation, they're more likely to get their best outcome. And the next is norming, where if there's a set of choices, we really need to know that those choices are safe. That we're going to be okay and not alone if we do this thing that feels a little bit different. And finally, we need to have an ask. Change won't happen if it's all theoretical. It needs to be direct. Will you change this now? Which will you choose now? So the first one on framing is a story that's been in a number of psychology and popular economics books. It's a real-world story of a childcare centre that had a problem. Parents turning up late to pick up their kids. And they did something that was a very obvious solution. None of us want to pay more for something, and none of us want to pay a fine. So they introduced a fine for turning up late to pick up your kids. Now, the surprising choice response to this was that more parents turned up late to pick up their kids after the introduction of the fine. The problem needed solving, at least get back to where we started, so they took away the fine, and what the response was that the level of parents turning up late stayed at a higher level than where it had started. So what's going on here is that we find that doing the right thing by the person looking after your kids, so bringing your values with you, is really important and really powerful. But we can break that if we shift to a transactional frame of thinking. So we shift from values to transaction. And then we can't put it back together. You know, something has shifted in that relationship. That's a clear example of how changing the frame changes the outcome. Now, I had one in a project I worked on where there was a group of people knocking on doors around a waterway, trying to ask households to let an expert to come to their home and help them find ways of using less fertiliser and having less impact on the waterways. And they got about 6 people to accept this free offer. And that was a problem. So what we did to solve that problem was do a community survey and ask people, why do you live here? What do you like about it? Are the waterways important? Do you care about their future? And overwhelmingly, we got yes to all of that. The environmental values are there, they're front and center, and yet people have been saying no to this free service to help. So we reflected those findings back in a letter to the community and said, hey, this is what you think as a community. So people could feel validated and not alone in having their environmental views. We then rang them up and said, hey, what do you like about living here? What do you think about the waterways? Are you concerned? And can we have somebody come to your house, take away your old fertilizers and find an alternative for you? And we went from 6 signed up to 400. And we only stopped at 400 because we ran out of budget to get the gardeners in to have the discussion. Now, the next area is, if we've got people to bring their best selves, is to make the choices safe. So this was an academic experiment where they went around a neighborhood and randomized to randomly put different messages on people's doors. All of the messages were asking for the same thing: use your air conditioner less intensively so we can reduce energy use. But the messages that were randomized were different. So one household would get a message that says, look, you can reduce your energy use by 29%. Another would get, hey, if you do this, you can reduce your energy bill by $50. The next house might get a message that says, look, you can do this and reduce your carbon footprint by a certain amount. And another set of houses got a message saying, look, about 8 out of 10 people in your neighborhood are modifying the way they use their air conditioners. That was put out there, and then the research team went back and they knocked on people's doors and said, do you remember getting something on your door? And the recall for the facts-based ones was high. It was good, that people did respond to those messages which were based in facts. And the recall of the message which I'm calling norms is that what other people are doing was weak. So this seems opposite to where I've been going with this for the last few minutes. The surprising outcome, the surprising choice, was that the messages that people remembered got no change. They didn't reduce their energy use. The messages that people did not remember got the change. Now that doesn't seem to make sense, but people internalize it. So I'm following a norm, that's safe, I don't need to think about it, and oh, this is what I do. It's really simple change. And one of the other takeaways from this is, if you're designing a campaign, never ever believe a focus group, because they will pick those first 3. They are big, sexy messages. They strike home, they say something, they just happen to not work. Now that was a positive norm, saying, look, we can modify our air conditioner use. Very few people are going to argue strongly with that. You can flip that and things get even more interesting. So this was a famous Keep America Beautiful campaign ran in the 1970s. There was an indigenous person on land surrounded by litter crying, and other people were seen littering around it. Everybody cried, everybody responded to this advert. It had very high recall. It won the Cannes International Advertising Award. But researchers years later started to look at how people respond to being exposed to littered environments. And what they found was there's a base level of people littering. If you show people a littered environment, the amount of littering goes up about 3 times. If you show people a littered environment with somebody littering in it, it goes up about 4 times. So there's a strong possibility that this campaign, which wasn't evaluated formally, had the opposite outcome. So we can play with norms, but they need to be positive ones. If we norm the problem, we get the problem. So we've brought people the best selves in the frame to our discussion. We've offered them some safe choices. Now we have to ask them to change. Now what you ask matters. And I was working on a project recently which was the plastic bag ban for Western Australia. And the social research in the lead-up showed that there was only a weak net positive support across the community for the ban. So there's a big slice of the community who are saying, we don't want the ban. The brief was go and convince them why we need the ban. Okay, so talk about the issues in the marine environment and what gets choked and how the microparticles end up in the fish and so on. Go and convince these people who are opposed to the ban why we need the ban. Then we looked at the data and we found there was no association between people's environmental views and whether they did or didn't support the ban and whether they did or didn't take their own shopping bags with them already. So we started to talk to people who opposed the ban. And what we found was they understood and agreed and supported all those environmental concerns. They were concerned about how they're going to get their shopping home. That was what made them opposed to the ban. They could not see a way through it. So we flipped the campaign from why to how. So the campaign became, what's your bag plan? This is happening, and you can be a bagger, you can take your bag. If that fails, which was the big pain point for people, you can be a boxer, ask to shop for a box. Or you can go naked, just put the things in your trolley and make a rush for the car if you've driven the car there. Or you can juggle if it's a small amount of stuff. So the solutions were available to people. But what's interesting about this is not that we had to campaign on the how instead of the why. What's interesting is that the support for the ban, post-campaign, post-ban, went up by about 50%, that net support measure. So what people do changes what they think and what they say and what they support. So it could change how they vote. So the hands are clearly leading the head. So if I'm trying to put this together and execute a campaign, perhaps to reduce volumes of waste, we would move away from this first picture of a big pile of waste, because it's saying, hey, the problem's bigger than us, it's bigger than you, there's nothing you can do about it, it's a big problem. We'd move through the second one, which is some solutions, we can sort things out and get waste managed more appropriately, and to the last one, where we see people doing the waste sorting correctly. So we shift through those ways of telling the story. So, the idea I'd like to share, if you're lucky enough to work in the space of helping to change the behaviours of people around you, is that the hands lead. Now, we've seen from our stories at the river, it was the framing, not shaming, that brought people to the party. Bring your best self, I'm not going to judge you for what you're doing to the river. We can see from what was going on with the littering that it's the solutions, not the problem, that get people inspired. We could see what was going on with the door hangers and a little bit with the bags as well, that it's the how and the who rather than the why that gets people to make change. And when we offer them an ask, when we ask for change, we have to offer choice, because people love control. So perhaps another contention is we should ban environmental education, because the truth is just too inconvenient. And if you're not lucky enough to work in the space of changing others, then remember how powerfully the hands lead, that what you do, other people see, and then they do, and then other people see them, and they do as well. And you, in doing what you do, in living an authentic life, living your values, making environmental choices, you're more important than Instagram. Thank you.